In this video, I want to talk a little bit about why I think Overwatch 1 and Overwatch 2 should be separate games. The first point I want to cover is that Overwatch 2 is a very different game. People have argued that it's not worthy of being called a sequel, but I completely disagree. There are so many significant changes that do justify it being called a sequel. But it's also these very changes that mean that it really makes for a very different experience. So you have very different target audiences for the two games. Overwatch 2 is more targeted towards people who enjoy quite fast-paced FPS action, more leaning towards that side, and less on the ability-based side, like less of crowd control abilities, less shield abilities. Whereas Overwatch 1 is more focused on encouraging those things, and shields and abilities and things like that. A good example of this would be Doomfist. He's a very ability-based hero. And in Overwatch 2, he's not as fun in my opinion because he is much more reliant on his aim, his raw mechanical aim and his raw mechanical skills, less than just pure abilities, which makes for a very different experience. And this is repeated with other heroes as well. It's not just Doomfist, it's other heroes are being reworked to have many of their abilities changed in this way. And they feel a lot more FPS type, less MOBA type. And you might say, I don't want to play a MOBA, I want to play FPS. And that's why I think Overwatch 2 should be separate and it's a great game, it's a really great game for people who enjoy that, who prefer that type of gameplay, and it should exist for people who enjoy that type of gameplay. But there's nothing wrong with keeping Overwatch 1 as its own separate game. And I want to address some of the arguments that have been made against doing this. The first argument is it splits the player base. So we'll talk about that. And by the way, this background footage you're watching in the background is my very final game on Reinhardt in competitive, at least in role queue anyway. So it's my final game. So I want to address that argument regarding splitting the player base, and this comes up very frequently. The reason I don't believe that this is a bad thing to split the player base is because we have very different types of players. So they're completely different games, and that's why you really want to split the player base, because they have different preferences, right? And you might be thinking, well, this could really harm the popularity of Overwatch 2 because people are still going to be playing Overwatch 1. Well, I don't think that's going to be a significant problem because Overwatch 2 is free to play. It should have no problem attracting a really large player base at all. It shouldn't have any problem doing that. The only reason it would have a problem would be if it's just inferior and people realize that it's inferior. If they feel it's inferior, then yeah, it's going to struggle competing against the original game. But again, I really doubt this is going to be a big problem because Overwatch 1 is dying. It's on its last leg. It doesn't have that big of a player base now anyway. It's only about, I don't know, maybe less than 100,000, I would say. And that's just a drop in the pond compared to what Overwatch 2 could pull, considering it's free to play. And so I don't really feel that this splitting the player base is a good argument, because we already split the player base between various different modes. Why do we have arcade? Why do we have competitive? Why do we have quick play? The reason we have these modes is because people have different preferences and they enjoy playing the game in a different way. And you might think that that's splitting the player base, and you'd be right, because that is splitting the player base between different modes. And you might think that might cause higher queue times. Well, yes and no, because it depends on whether the mode is being throttled or restricted by like, is it the amount of tanks that it needs, or is it the amount of support? If it's role queue, then you're bottlenecked by the amount of support. At least in Overwatch 2, that was how it was in the beta. So you have a greater demand for the number of support players. And it's not strictly we need X number of players. We don't just need any players. We don't just need a raw increase in player count. It's a specific type of players. It's the support players we need. So I don't buy this argument of splitting the player base means less players, which means longer queue times, because it's not just less. It's not just less players that means longer queue times. It's less support players that means longer queue times. And so yeah, we can split the player base between different modes, and that's not harmful because we recognize that's not harmful because people have different preferences. Some people want to play no limits, some people want to play quick play classic, some people prefer deathmatch, and in having all these modes you're already splitting players between different modes, and we understand that's fine. And some people might say you want to keep, maybe some people are offering an alternative, like maybe we can have an arcade mode that is Overwatch 1 and 6v6, but I really don't think I think that's harder to do than simply having Overwatch 1 as a separate game, and I'll explain why I think that's harder to do. The reason I think that's harder is because Overwatch 2 balance is completely separate, completely different. Like all of the tanks are completely different and very powerful. Like they have higher offensive ability, higher defensive, not higher defensive, but more very brawler type, and that means they're very strong. They're almost like bosses in other games. Like they're more following in the spirit of like bosses, and that means that you have a mismatch with the balance, and the balance goes out of whack if you have many tank heroes, and let's say they try to do 6v6 where you have 2 tanks in every game. Well, those 2 tanks are going to really dominate the game, and it will be hard to have like a balance of defensiveness. Like there won't be very much point playing the other heroes, right? So it throws things out of whack when the tank heroes are really balanced like that. So because of this, you would have to have the original balance as well of 6v6. You would also have to have the original balance and maintain that throughout the lifespan of Overwatch 2 if you wanted to replicate Overwatch 1. Now, if your only issue is 5v5, if that's the only reason that you prefer Overwatch 1 is because you prefer 6v6, then yeah, we could just have a 6v6 mode. But it's not just 6v6 and 5v5, there's many more changes, you know. There's so many differences with Overwatch 2. It's everything. It's the monetization. It's having heroes behind a battle pass. It's having all sorts of transactions. It's having a completely different engine. Not exactly different, but very more demanding. It's having a different UI. It's having a different sound system. And all of these things really add up to make a very different experience. And the entire philosophy of the gameplay is changed. This is why we need Overwatch 1 to be kept separate and alive. I really strongly believe this, and I want to lay out my arguments in a text form as well. I might do that in the description, just so you have a text form of these arguments in a very simplified form. I've tried to explain my case. I think the argument for keeping Overwatch 1 separate is a very strong argument. Many other games don't delete their original after they release the sequel. Left 4 Dead did not delete original Left 4 Dead 1 when they released Left 4 Dead 2. Just countless other games do not do this. I don't think Overwatch 2 is an update. I think it's very much worthy of being called a sequel, because it is a sequel. There's so many new things, so many different things, completely different maps. The 2 CP maps are now gone, and that's kind of really sad for me. I really enjoy playing on them. Some people will think I'm crazy for enjoying 2 CP or the assault mode. I mean, maybe I'm in the minority, but I really love those modes. I don't think they should be deleted. And if we were to have a 6v6 mode, then it would need to include those original maps as well, because that's the original experience. That's what we Overwatch 1 players who prefer Overwatch 1, that's what we enjoy. And we enjoy the crowd control abilities and all of these things that make for a more slightly slower paced gameplay, slightly more MOBA type of gameplay. And yeah, I don't know how I can make my appeal stronger to the developers, but there's just so many other games that keep the original games alive, like Battlefield series, the Call of Duty series, the Sims, Counter-Strike, just so many games that don't delete the original. And they don't worry about splitting the playbase, because why would they? They feel that the new one is going to attract more players because it's better and it's newer. And the same can be said for Overwatch. We shouldn't have to worry about splitting players, as far as Overwatch 2 anyway. We shouldn't have to worry about it, because we should expect people will naturally gravitate towards the new one because it should be better, right? It should have better graphics, it should have more heroes and whatever else, new content that should attract new players. And you might agree with me now, and you might say, yeah, Overwatch 2 is easily going to take all of the new players, and maybe even nobody will play Overwatch 1. So what's the point of having Overwatch 1 if it's just going to die and everyone's going to move? Well, the point is, you allow that death to take place naturally. You don't force players to the new one. You just allow people to naturally stop playing the game. And when enough people stop playing, and when enough people transition, when everyone is transitioned to the new game because they believe it's better, then you don't need to keep the original game alive anymore, because there's no more demand to keep the original game anymore. It's just, you might as well just delete it at that point, but then I don't think we're at that point yet. I think we still have a fair amount of demand for the original game. I think at least 10,000 players will be playing it still, and that's enough to have games. I don't think we're at the point yet where we cannot have games due to lack of players. And even with Left 4 Dead, a very old game now, it's 14 years old. It's from 2008, and even that game still has players. So why do we need to delete Overwatch 1? Sorry, what's the point? When other games have been keeping their games alive for over a decade without problem. And I think a good example of games being split by how they prefer to be played is World of Warcraft, Retail and Classic. That also does this, because they know that players have different preferences, and some players prefer the original World of Warcraft, even though so many things were different, like the XP gain was different and slower, and the new Retail one is quicker to gain XP. But Classic was a big success because lots of people still prefer that original gameplay, and the same can happen for Overwatch 1 as well. So as long as there's a profit incentive, which there still is, they can still sell the original Overwatch game. They can still sell copies of it, and people will still continue to buy it as long as they enjoy the game. So yeah, there is a server cost, I agree, but it's not a huge cost. We're not talking about a indie game company, we're talking about Activision Blizzard. They have more than enough money to keep the servers alive. Like, it's not even an argument. Having to keep servers alive is not a good argument not to do this. Like, I just don't see why it would cost so much. They already have these servers available. They're already using them, and they can repurpose them later on for Overwatch 2. If nobody's playing Overwatch 1, you can host Overwatch 1 and Overwatch 2 on the same server on the same machine, and you can assign those servers to different games. Like, if there's not enough demand for Overwatch 1, then sure, that server space can be assigned to Overwatch 2, but there's no need to delete the servers altogether. And the final alternative I will put forward, and I really don't want to have to get to this point, but this is the last resort, that if they really don't want to keep the servers alive, then give us, the players, the ability to host private servers, or at least to pay for our servers, pay Blizzard to host servers. Like, I wouldn't mind paying £5 per month to keep the servers alive. I wouldn't mind paying even £10 a month if I could just pay whenever I wanted to play. £10 per month if I wanted to go back to the original. I mean, I'm not someone who hates Overwatch 2. I think it's a great game. I will play a lot myself as well, because I think it's a good game. and a very different gameplay. When I'm in the mood for a more fast-paced gameplay and more FPS type of gameplay, and I don't really like the crowd control or the shields of Overwatch 1, then sure, it's a great change of pace to go to Overwatch 2. So I would love to have the ability to switch between them whenever I want to switch between them. I think that just about wraps it up for me as far as arguments. I think I've tried to cover the arguments against, and obviously the argument for is just giving players the choice. I believe players should have the choice. I don't think they should be deprived of this choice. We paid for Overwatch 1. We supported the game for 6 years. I bought the game on multiple accounts. I think I've paid at least like £60 at this point. And I would be happy to continue to fund the game. I would even pay a subscription fee if needed to keep the game alive, and to have the choice to be able to play the two games. So let me know what you guys think. Do you think that we should have the choice? Would you be willing to pay a subscription fee in order to continue to play Overwatch 1? Which I don't think we should need to, but this is a very last resort. Like if they really don't want to keep the servers alive due to costs or whatever, which is kind of ridiculous. They have more than enough money in their pockets. But if for whatever reason they cannot afford it, then we would have to pay. Would you be willing to do that? And yeah, the final point I will make is that Overwatch 2 is bound to make so much money because there's so much monetization, and I don't think there's anything wrong with monetization. Like companies should have the ability to profit from their hard work. I don't mind that at all. I just mind that it's a very different experience. Locking heroes behind Battle Pass means that not all of the heroes are available to everyone, and this means it's a very different experience. I wouldn't describe it as pay to win as such. There are pay to win elements. I think that's slightly being blown out of proportion, but the problem is this sets the precedent for genuine pay to win. Like if they can put heroes behind Battle Pass, then eventually it could get to a point where you absolutely need to have these heroes or whatever. They say that they're moving away from that design philosophy, but that's to be seen. We don't know if they can commit to that. And yeah, I don't mind companies getting profit at all. What I mind is when our choice is taken away from us. And a good example of this was when role queue and open queue happened. Before open queue happened, we only had the choice to play role queue. For a whole year, actually, we had to really ask the developers to give us open queue, and eventually they relented. Eventually, they gave us open queue, and open queue is a good example of a very different type of Overwatch. You might say Overwatch 2 is just an update. Maybe you've had so many updates in the past already. What's wrong with another update? Like you can adapt to the new changes, right? Well, I don't think we should need to, because of role queue and open queue. Role queue was such a huge difference, and I really hated it at the time because it's so restricting and so long queue times and so on. There are so many issues, and this is why we need to give players the preference, just as they did with role queue and open queue. They should give the choice between Overwatch 1 and Overwatch 2. And yeah, that just about wraps up everything I've got on my mind. There's more arguments I could make. But yeah, feel free to put forward your arguments and share your opinions on how you feel about Overwatch 1 being deleted. Because there's no softer way to put it. The game is being deleted. You will not be able to play Overwatch 1 as it is today, and you will not be able to play assault maps. You will not be able to play Doomfist as he is today, as a damage hero. Yeah, I don't really have any more points than that to make. But thank you for watching the video. I know my gameplay here isn't the best. It was my first game of the day. But I was just trying to do my placements. Yeah. Looking forward to Overwatch 2 releasing in 4 days' time. But I'm not looking forward to this game being deleted. Thank you for watching anyway.